the best thing that you can do is not worry about the worst things or the what ifs, because anything can happen, but to be prepared and know that there are possibilities, but don't live in fear. Welcome to Life Unleashed,
the podcast all about creating the best life for you and your furry best friend.
If you're a dog mom on the go, juggling life, work, and the endless joys of being a dog parent, then you're in the right place. I'm Dani.
And I'm Nick.
And together with the incredible dog mom community from Tails Up Pup, we're here to share advice, stories, and the obsession we have over the love for our dogs.
Get ready to laugh, learn, and lean on each other because life with your dog just got even more awesome.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you are having a dandy time. If you are watching on video, we decorated for Christmas in the little studio here.
Christmas is going to be here before we know it.
I can't believe it. So we are heading into Thanksgiving, Black Friday coming up soon. So we will have a podcast episode probably on that. I don't know. We'll have to see if we can find enough things to talk about. But for today, I wanted to do a deep dive into our NICU experience because it's something we really didn't talk about. We only talked about it in our birth story.
Yeah.
So if you didn't listen to that, you can go back and listen to that first, because then you'll have the whole backstory of how traumatic and awful our birth was. But we are glad to be through it and have a healthy baby now. So spoiler alert, there are no complications now, and Callan is living a happy and healthy little life.
Doesn't that whole experience feel so long ago?
It feels so long ago. He just turned 3 months. It feels so much longer than that. He seems so much bigger than 3 months. And it's crazy that we went through that and that we really have, it was short-lived. And I will preface this by saying we had a good situation compared to many other people in the NICU. So this is not us complaining or anything like that. We just wanted to share our experience. And again, it's something we didn't really talk about. We have lots of pictures, lots of memories from this time. And it's something that, we did not expect. I was so naive when it came to all this. And I had a healthy pregnancy. Callan was healthy the entire time. We had no scares, no nothing, no indications that this would happen. And so I actually have a memory from when I was pregnant. We ran into someone in the neighborhood and she was like, oh, the hospital you're delivering at is great. And if you need the NICU, it's also great too, because she had twins and had to go to the NICU. And I, was just like, okay, I'm not.
That was not even
yeah, I'm not going to need it because my baby's been healthy. I don't have twins. There was no reason for me to think oh yeah, let me look into hospitals that have a good NICU in the case that I would need it. It just was not on our radar at all. And so, we went through the whole birth. So again, if you didn't listen to that, you'll understand how we got to where we are. But I got an infection in labor, and then Callan had meconium inside of me and created all these complications. Callan got stuck in my pelvis.
He ingested the meconium that really got in his lungs, and apparently because a normal birth, they would squeeze the lungs when the baby comes out. And so if they had swallowed meconium, a lot of times
when you push the baby
when you push the baby out, a lot of times that really helps that kind of get out of the lungs. But because you had to kind of get that more emergency C-section, he didn't have that same thing. So it was really kind of stuck and gooey in his lungs, which really caused him having a hard time to breathe.
And I labored for close to 15 hours unmedicated. So I was in a lot of pain. So a lot of my memories from labor actually don't exist because my body just, I guess, blocked them out. Nick has a better memory.
Isn't that so funny how we have just such different recollections of how all that went down?
Yeah. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but throughout the labor, I was talking with the nurse when I was able to speak. And I had asked her, who's going to be in here for the birth? And she said, it's just going to be me, your midwife, and maybe one other person. But it was just going to be a few people, very intimate. And that's what I want, because I don't like a lot of people staring at me, let alone when I'm naked and giving birth to a baby. And so I was like, hey, that's exactly what I wanted. But as things happened, I remember her coming in and saying, we're going to the C-section because of these things that have happened. We're going to have a bigger birthday party. That's literally what she said.
Yeah, she did say we're going to have a bigger birthday.
We're going to have these people in case there were something. And that was all I really had heard. But there's still, to me, to my memory, they never said your baby's going to the NICU, your baby's gonna need this. It was just a in case thing.
Well, yeah, the in case had to do with they knew that he had swallowed, or they had because there was meconium, it was likely he had swallowed it. So they had the whole like respiratory team, like the pediatric respiratory team in there, which is the people that ended up like as soon as Callan was taken out, they brought him over there and he didn't cry right away. And I knew that that was not a good sign. And they basically used like a cupping method on his back, whatever, trying to like, I guess, get his lungs to open up, get him to breathe, get him to cry.
Yeah, so
he was swarmed with people right away after coming out.
The word I want to use is like the violence they had to use to get him out of me was my first indication that this could go downhill.
Yeah, he was stuck.
He was very stuck. And then
not only the violence, but the whole, so like when we're in the C-section operating room, everything was like serious, but like I would say more or less like pretty laid back, like definitely standard. The doctor was kind of like joking around a little bit. They were moving like with very, efficiency, but then as things weren't going well and it was clear that he was not coming out as intended, as easily as they intended, you could see, I felt the mood. You probably were a little too out of it, but the mood in the room totally changed. Everyone got very kind of like serious, almost quiet. Only the doctor was talking, ordering people, do this. And and Danielle started to get yanked around on the table a little bit because they were really having to use a lot of force to try to get him out.
But up until then, like it wasn't an emergency in that we had to get him out this instance. Like his heart rate wasn't dropping. Nothing was wrong with him at that point. It wasn't until they cut me open and tried to get him out and realized he was really stuck that it turned into that. And I had a few friends who had C-sections, 2 weeks before me, let alone like a few other people who I knew who had them, even longer ahead of me. And everyone that I know who had a C-section has pictures where they pass the baby over the tarp. The tarp? Is that what it is?
Yeah,
I don't know.
The shield.
Drape.
The drape.
And they're happy holding their baby. And instantly when they got him out, they did not hand him to me. I went through all of this drama and then I still did not even get to see my baby instantly. They took him away and we didn't hear him cry. So those were our two first indicators, like something is wrong.
And I wasn't even invited to go over there. Like there was no room for me. I mean, as soon as he got taken out, they rushed him right over to like, I guess a little warming table. And he was like surrounded by people. I couldn't even see him barely. I saw him when they went over and we've never had a kid before, but like to me, he looked really pale. And that's what they started commenting on, kind of after the fact. Like his color was not good. He was very white, which means like he wasn't like getting enough oxygen.
Everyone in the room was very calm. They didn't hint to us. Like obviously we knew something wasn't right because they didn't hand him to us. We weren't hearing him cry, but everyone stayed calm, cool, and collected, which kind of allowed us to the best of our ability to also stay calm. And then it probably was quicker than it felt like in that moment, but he did start crying and then they invited Nick over and he got to take pictures and weigh him and do all that stuff. But still at that point, the whole time in the operating room, I got to see him from afar, but I never got to hold the baby. And it wasn't until the post-op that they were doing all these things. They were doing the APGAR score, all that stuff. And then they did bring him to us for maybe 10 minutes.
10, 15 minutes probably.
And yeah, we got to FaceTime our families and show him.
Well, it was a ride of emotional. It was an emotional roller coaster because the good mood and then things got serious. I think Danielle, you didn't really see. Like my perspective was a little different. I thought there was something a little wrong.
I couldn't see.
Yeah,
so.
Everyone was like in a relatively good mood, but it did feel way more serious than they were initially.
Yeah.
And so I was also concerned about you. You like clearly were not doing well. Like it was a very traumatic like extraction of the baby. I think that's the word they used, extraction. So I was worried about you. I wasn't getting invited over there, which again, like I didn't expect it to be like that. Then when we finally got to see as a boy, he was crying. It was like, okay, everybody could take a deep breath. Then we went to the post-op room. We got to have him for 10 to 15 minutes, but we thought he was going to be with us the rest of the time. This is only in retrospect. So we thought he's going to be with us. This is great. He latched on, started to try to feed from you. Everything was good. And we thought they were going to like take some measurements from him, and then we were all going to be going up to the recovery room, and we were going to recover for the next few days and go home. That's what we expected to happen.
But at some point when we were in that post-op room, they came to take him away, and they said, we're going to take him to a transition room. You're going to head upstairs. And it seemed like when they were talking about this transition room, that it was something quick. He was just going to go there for his recovery. We were going to go and stay where we were until we went upstairs and we would all be reunited. At that point, we had no idea what we were in for. And looking back, it's crazy because it turned into so much more.
And to be fair, I don't think they really knew either. I think they only expected it to be like an hour or two max with him in that transition room.
I don't know what exactly the transition room is for anyone else. I believe that it's different than the nursery.
So what it is it's a place for them to recover from like a circumcision, or, in situations where like they're not doing great right after birth and they just need a little bit more care. So maybe they need some oxygen, little things. If it's more serious than that, they go to the NICU. It's kind of like in between, not serious enough to go to the NICU, but they need a little bit of help.
So they told us that he needed oxygen. So that's why he was going. And he was there. In our experience, there was only ever like maybe 3 or 4 babies in the transition room. But they told us because of privacy policies and I don't know, basically for the safety of babies.
Yeah, they were saying HIPAA stuff, and it just didn't really make sense.
None of it makes sense to us, really, because you're allowed to see other people's babies in the NICU, but in the transition room, it was different. And so you were not allowed to go into the transition room. But we had some amazing nurses, and she would go in and say, if there's no other baby there, and I hope she doesn't get in trouble because I don't know if this is like rules or not, but if there was no other baby in there, she was like, I'll run you over so you can see your baby, and then you're going to have to come back. It'll be a quick visit.
And we got very lucky. Our recovery room was literally the next door over from the transition room.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if we had to walk like super far away or something?
I don't think they did that on purpose. I think it just happened to be that way. And so, yes, we were very close. So Nick got to go and see Callan a lot more often than I did.
Because you couldn't walk at that point.
I couldn't walk, and I was on medication from the infection, and I was just still out of it. So I believe the first day you got to run over there for yourself.
I went over there, I think, at least 2 times.
And yeah, I think you took your mom one time.
That's
and
right.
I didn't go over there the first day, I don't think. Maybe I did. I cannot remember now.
I don't think so.
So they ended up, like, they would just give us like periodic like little updates, and they'd be like, okay, he's doing good, but he has to stay. He's doing good, but he has to stay. That's what I feel like they kept kind of telling us. And they were like, hey, he's staying the night over there. And that was,
which we really weren't expecting that.
No.
We thought at most it would be a few hours.
We just thought he needed a little bit of oxygen and he was going to be on his way. But this just continued. And so they would try to wean him off. There were lots of numbers. I don't know them all anymore. But basically, he was on a certain amount of oxygen. They'd try to wean him down. When they would lower it, then he would not tolerate it well. So then they'd be like, okay, he has to stay for this much longer, at least, until we can try to wean him again. And so it was like this big battle of trying to wean him off the oxygen, but he wasn't strong enough. And that lasted for another day. And that was when, I think we talked about this in the other podcast, so I don't want to like repeat ourselves too much. But basically they came in, they said, he has to go to the NICU. And we were like, why? He's fine. He just needs oxygen. And it was like this whole battle, but they were like, yeah, he's going to the NICU because he can't stay in the transition room any longer. And then they came back and said, there's no room in the NICU. And that was like our most traumatic time of the whole time, because they were going to send him to another hospital. And then we really advocated for ourselves and we fought our way in, and we said, look, we know he is the least severe kid, which is why they wanted to send him somewhere. But because he's so healthy and he's not going to be here for a long time. Can you just squeeze him in and find a little bed for him to stay just a little bit longer? And so they ended up letting him stay in the transition room even longer until they could squeeze him into the NICU. And that is when we were able to freely come and go and visit him in the NICU, which was finally a hoorah moment. So while he wasn't in the room next to us anymore, we were allowed to go see him whenever we wanted.
But when we saw him the first time in the NICU, it really seemed like a little bit more serious, because I guess they do this with all the babies. We show up there in the transition room. He just had like the little oxygen thing going on. In the NICU, he had like a much more crazy contraption for the oxygen. It was like taped to his face. He had a feeding tube in. He had like all this stuff, and it looked like a lot more like, oh my gosh, this is crazy.
Yeah, so I got to breastfeed him in that post-op room when we first saw him. And then after that, I had to start pumping, and obviously like not much was coming out. So the nurses were so nice, and they would run over any of the colostrum that I would get, but it just wasn't enough. So they started feeding him formula. But then when we went to the NICU, he now had a feeding tube in, and we were like, oh my gosh. And it was crazy to me in that moment. They would do all these things and they would never tell us or ask us. Like, he had a passy, he had this like weighted vest on, he had this feeding tube, and it was just like, was anyone going to tell us any of this? Like, we just walked in and we were kind of shocked. And also, I thought you were going to say this, like when you have to be like admitted into the NICU. You walk down this long hallway. It's kind of like the movies. I feel like you walk on this long, like very hospital hallway.
You have to be buzzed in through this first secure door. There's like 2 points of like huge security.
And then you have to scrub in, and it's just like the operating room. You have got this every time your brand new individual soap sponge. You'd have to scrub under your fingernails all the way up to your elbows for, was it 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah, like a while.
You had to scrub before they would let you in. And every person had to do that, whether you were touching a baby or not. You had to scrub in, and then they would let you in. And then we would get to go see him. And so in the first day he was in the NICU, he was in this tiny room. Well, normal room, but like, it was a room. So there were only
6 babies?
I think there's 5 babies in there. And it was so sad when we walked in, because I became very grateful for our situation, seeing how other people's situations were, and even overhearing people.
And we met some people in the waiting room.
Every baby had a sign, and like someone's job, I guess, is to make these signs, and it has their name and their birthday. And so we like very quickly realized people had been there for months and months and months, and we were like, oh my goodness.
And much, because it had their weight on there too, much smaller
tiny
weights.
Babies and very premature babies. And so, we went in, they did let us hold him, which was nice. He was hooked up to all these cords though.
Yeah, it made it hard.
And they let me try to breastfeed, but he had these cords across his mouth and his nose, and it just wasn't working. And I didn't want to try to stress him out anymore.
And it's not like you were experienced at breastfeeding at that point, him or you, like no one really knew.
We had no idea what we were doing.
We had no idea what we were doing at that point. So it makes it that much harder. You have all these cords trying to do it for like one of the first times. It wasn't going well.
But it was just it was so nice that we finally got to like see him and hold him and feel like we weren't going to be rushed out of the room, and we could stay as long as we wanted.
And his color was coming back too. He was pretty pale for a while.
It's crazy because like as a first-time parent, like you don't know what it is to love your own child. You don't know what it is to be a mom or a dad. We didn't even know how to change a diaper. And so it was so weird, like seeing this other human that I knew was my kid, but I felt like I didn't know them yet. And they were ripped away from me in this room. But I was glad we were in this little room because it was quiet, it was intimate. And I was saying that we weren't rushed out of there, except for I was on the clock for my antibiotics. So we constantly had to be watching the clock to be like, okay, we have to go back so I can get my medicine again. But yeah, that was the first day basically.
It was finally like it sounds crazy, but everything seemed emotionally kind of like let down a little bit, because we had, the crazy traumatic of like the labor and then the C-section, and then is he gonna, is he okay? And then oh my gosh, he's going to a different hospital. No, let's try to make sure that doesn't happen. And then finally it was like, okay, he's in the NICU, and it was like, he's under great, great care. I finally at that point like was like, okay, I feel like he's gonna be okay.
And at our hospital, the nurse would either be like assigned to 1 or 2 babies, depending on the need. So Callan had a nurse that was shared between one other baby. So like if he cried, if he needed anything, like she was there. And the nurses, all the nurses that we met were so nice, so kind, so caring. Like NICU nurses are out of this world. I don't know how they do it. It's so probably demanding, and they see high turnover. Like they make a relationship with the baby and then the baby goes home, which I guess is good for them, but it's probably a hard job.
Yeah, all of the nurses we had in the NICU were good. I guess so on day 2, right, Callan then got to be moved to...
like halfway through the day. I think he stayed there, and then, he was moved into the big arena.
Which is like kind of like the last place before babies get to go home. The most intense babies are in those, or the ones that are, I guess, are the hardest to take care of. And I don't know why. The most needy. I don't know why Callan went there immediately. Maybe that was just the only open spot. I don't know. Maybe it's protocol to send them there first and then to the bigger room. But these smaller rooms were like the more needy babies. And then on day 2, halfway through the day, he got to move to the bigger room, which meant that, like, this is a very good sign. His feeding tube came out. He was still on the oxygen, but they were going to really start trying to wean him off more. And it just meant that he didn't need as much care, which was a good sign.
And they had told us, like, he might get to come up with you guys today. So we were then hopeful and, like, kept asking questions and counting the clock. And it was just a waiting game. But he was not doing well still, being weaned off the oxygen. So then they'd have to start all over again and wean him off and start him all over again. And it was a battle. So he stayed there for that night, didn't he?
He either stayed there that night or he came up to us that night at 10 p.m., 10 or 11.
I think he stayed there because then the next day I got to bring the lactation consultant, and Ensley came and your mom came.
And we met. And that was the night that he came.
We met a really nice lady in the waiting room who was a mom to, like, her daughter gave birth. So she was the grandma of the baby. And she was saying how they had been there for weeks and they just come and they sit there and they just hang out with the baby. But there's a rule in the NICU that you can only have 2 adults per baby. And so, like, if
both parents are there, no one else.
Then no one else. So she would have to come sit for hours in the waiting room and wait her turn until one of the parents would rotate her in. It was so sad.
And she came all the way from like 2 hours away and to like go and get her turn. And the husband was so like not willing to let this grandma go in there that she didn't ever get to go see the baby.
Yeah, it was a really sad situation. So yeah, we got to spend more time with Callan, I feel like, that next day, and really hang out with him in this more open area. And he had a new nurse, and she was super nice too. And she would, do anything that we asked, and she would really help us. And that was just a great experience. And then, that's when I kept kind of pestering her. I was like, is he going to come up today? Is he going to come up today? And she kept telling me, like, he's doing so much better. And they were weaning him down to this point, and he was doing well. So they would have to wean him down and let him stay there. Wean him down and let him stay there. So there was like one more interval that he had to go before he could be released. So she was like, I think that he will be good to go today. And the shift change was at 7:00 at night. And she's like, they're probably not going to do it until after shift change. And I kept saying, can they please do it before? Please, please, please. And she's like, oh, now they're saying that they might do it before, but ended up that they waited until after shift change. So it wasn't until like 10 p.m. that he got to come up. So now we're so exhausted, but it was the first night we got with our baby. And it was just a whirlwind. We really didn't sleep that night. I just wanted to hold him. I didn't want to put him down, but I also was so tired.
Yeah, all of that was a blur. We really were not sleeping very much at all during that time.
Yeah. And so even Callan did not sleep that much that night, I feel like. But he slept in my arms. It was so cute. And then the next day we got to go home. So it really was short-lived, but it is I don't even know what words to use. It is a crazy experience to give birth, carry this baby for 40 weeks, give birth, and then have them ripped away from you and not be able to, have that special bond. And I was telling Nick, it's like crazy to look back because to us, it was normal to not have the baby in the room with us. But to the nurses, it probably was super not common to come take care of a mom and not have the baby in the room.
Yeah. people that would come in there for the first time would come in, and like if they hadn't read the chart ahead of time, they're like, "Where's the baby?"
A lot of nurses and doctors would ask, "Where's the baby?" And that was really hard. I feel like there probably could have been some better communication for them, because obviously I was very sad that the baby wasn't there.
Yeah, it's like every time we had to, oh, he's in the NICU, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so."
But everyone was shocked and didn't understand or didn't expect it, because they knew that we were healthy and that the baby was born at 40 weeks and 2 days, and it just was. It was so unexpected to everyone that's why I think everyone was asking, where is the baby?
And there was some kind of like conflicting feelings. It was like, obviously it was sad to not have him with us in the room, but at the same time, we wanted him to be in the NICU getting the care that he needed. So like, it was like sad, but at the same time, it's like, I'm glad that we're at a place where he can get this care and all of that.
I think the biggest feeling I had for a majority of the time was confusion, because it was so unexpected that I kept being like, I don't understand why they can't just turn the oxygen off and he'll learn how to breathe. And like, I just didn't understand anything or why it was happening and how did we get here. So there was like a lot of confusion in that time.
Well, and you're having to recover. I mean, it was so hard for you. You had just been sliced open and all this, crazy stuff. And you had, pretty much almost given a normal birth. So like you unmedicated, you had gone through all this crazy trauma, and then having the emotional trauma of him not being there and not knowing what's going on, like the uncertainty of it. That was a lot. It was hard enough for me, and like you had to go through so much more.
I will say one of my favorite things that I had in my hospital bag was my own hospital gown. And like when people ask me, what should I pack?
Shout out to your mom.
Shout out to my mom. Whether you have to go to the NICU, whether you have a C-section, I loved having my own like hospital gown, which is basically just like a nightgown, but it was long, it was comfortable. The hospital gown was like kind of scratchy, and it just didn't fit right. And I felt very exposed in that gown. And in my own gown, I felt more comfortable. And like, yes, I had to walk to the NICU, and I was like glad I had that to cover me up and be comfortable. And I feel like your own hospital gown, for the cost of it, is worth it. Also, you can wear it around your house. Like I didn't, because it was kind of traumatic for me, but you definitely could wear it in your recovery days at home as well.
Yeah, it's just nice to have something that's much more comfy. A lot of that hospital stuff is not like the nicest stuff, which is crazy for how much they charge you for all those things. When you look at the bill when you get home, you're like, I paid $20 for a pair of socks.
Okay, I wrote some questions, but I feel like we kind of answered these, but I want like a specific answer. Okay, physically, emotionally, or mentally, what were the hardest parts of the NICU experience for you?
I would say emotionally.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, definitely emotionally. I mean, I felt like we overall handled the other stuff better. I mean, you had a lot more physical things to deal with, but it was emotionally the most of it. Mainly because it was super not in like we didn't have any idea that was going to happen. We really weren't. And we made a lot of plans for like, okay, what if it has to be a C-section, all this stuff. But we really never thought too much and prepared for what if he's not like going to be with us or has to go to the NICU. We never really thought about that.
One of the hardest parts for me, looking back, really wasn't a big deal. But to me in the moment, it was a big deal. We waited 9 months to find out what our baby was, boy or girl. We made a ton of videos on the internet about predictions and like, will it be a boy or girl, and having the dogs guess. Like, we made it a big deal, and we had a lot of people invested in finding out if Callan was going to be a boy or a girl. And then we announced that Callan was born, and I had this whole vision of how I was going to execute it and tell the whole world. First, I was going to tell our families by FaceTiming them and like being like, guess. And then we would show the baby. And then we were going to we had made this video, but we had a vision for the end. And we just had all these plans for how it was going to go down. And our baby was ripped away from us. So now we couldn't do any of those things. So now, our parents are telling our aunts and uncles the baby was born, and they're like, is it a boy or girl? And I'm like, please wait to tell them. Like, we wanted to tell everyone, and we wanted it to be like a special moment. And at the end of the day, I was like, I am literally like, felt like on my deathbed. My baby's not here. Y'all just tell them and do whatever you want. And I even like had a long conversation with Ensley. I was like, just wait a little bit longer. Baby's going to be here soon. Like, just wait a few more hours. And then eventually I was like, I'm not going to make you wait any longer. Like, it's a boy.
Yeah, and I guess it's just like you have your plans in your mind, but then, reality has its own ideas.
Yeah. And again, looking back, like, I'm grateful that my baby is healthy and our situation was as good as it could be given the circumstances. So at the end of the day, that is the least of my worries, and it wasn't a big deal, but it was very sad that we waited all this time and then our vision was gone, our excitement. We were so excited to find out the gender, and then at the end of the day, like, it didn't even matter. Like, there were much bigger problems at that time. Okay, we really answered like all the questions I had written down just by talking and conversation, but I will end it with one or maybe two questions. This might turn into two. What advice would you give to someone who is going through a NICU experience?
Well, the first advice that I would give in general for like a birth experience as well as the NICU, and we did this pretty well, but we could have done it better, and that is like mentally preparing yourself for all the different ins and outs that could happen. I would say that even though it felt like it was going to be a remote chance that a C-section was going to happen for us, we mentally prepared for that. And actually that didn't throw me off that much because I'd kind of rehearsed that in my mind. I was like, this could happen and we're going to take it in stride. I hadn't rehearsed and, planned for a NICU experience or all this stuff. And it's not trying to like, don't think about like the negatives or the worst stuff that can happen. But I think if you mentally prepare of like, I'm going to be able to roll with the punches and kind of just think about that stuff in your mind, rehearse it a little bit, it definitely made the C-section experience easier. And I think it probably would have made the NICU experience easier if I had kind of mentally prepared for that. And so I'm definitely a big fan of like rehearsing these types of things in your minds and just, preparing for the hope for the best, prepare for the worst kind of. And by preparing, it's like just, mentally preparing for that stuff. What about you?
Well, I have something else in my head. My other part of the question was like, someone listening to this who wants to have kids or currently is pregnant, now listen to our experience and now might be fearful of what's going to happen to them. And I feel like the best thing that you can do is not worry about the worst things or the what ifs, because anything can happen, but to be prepared and know that there are possibilities, but don't live in fear, because I feel like that will ruin your experience. You need to enjoy this moment, and you're bringing a life into this world. It's so special and it's so cool. So don't live in fear, but just know that things can happen, and just you're gonna have to bend and go with it. And at the end of the day, probably listen to the nurses and doctors who are going to try to guide you, because they do this all the time. But, also you have to make the best decision for yourself. And if you disagree with them, you're going to have to advocate for yourself too.
Yeah, I think like with the mentally preparing, it can be tough if you're, living in that headspace to turn to negative and be fearful and stuff like that. And I think you're right. I think you got to keep while it's important to plan for that stuff and be ready, keeping that positive outlook and like the positive mindset, that really helps. And I feel like we had that along pretty much the entire way. It's like we always were hoping for the best, and like had a positive outlook. Like we very much intended that the birth to be unmedicated, like we had planned out and like what you wanted. And we kept that positive mindset the whole way. But then when it wasn't working out, you were willing to be like, okay, we'll do what we need to get the baby here safely.
And everyone's heart's burning question: how much did this cost?
Well, thankfully we have insurance, so
Yes.
we only had to pay our full max out of pocket. So
But
that
the
was okay.
hospital bills ranked up to over $160,000, which is crazy. And my bills were actually more expensive than Callan's NICU experience, which is wild, because I was considered high risk, even though I went all 40 weeks, not high risk, very healthy, and then give birth. And now I'm high risk because I guess my infection and all that stuff.
I think just like the delivery room and the C-section, like that combined, those things, there was like a line item for like $90,000.
Yeah, it's wild. Giving birth in the United States is very expensive. So insurance is definitely nice.
Yeah, if you didn't have insurance, I don't know how much of that they would have tried to collect, but like that literally that's like bankrupting level of
Yeah.
money.
But will we do it again?
Hopefully.
We do plan on having a second child eventually.
Now that Callan's here and that we've gone through that experience, how do you feel about the idea of having a second kid? Do you feel more strongly, the same?
Definitely more sad because like the trauma definitely takes away from like the fun and exciting parts, but I still want to do it again because I want to give Callan a sibling, but I'm not excited to go back to the hospital. I feel like it's going to be scary, but the only bright side that I have to the situation is that I will go in with a planned C-section. I know that my experience will be different. I'm not going to try to labor. I'm not going to try to push the baby out. I'm just going to have a C-section planned and know that that is what's going to happen. So I know that my situation should hopefully be better than this time.
I think that now that we've had the experience, 3 months with Callan, it's like I'm maybe even more excited than I was before to like have a second kid. It's so great, like everything that we've been able to do and like the relationship we're already building with Callan. It's like having another kid and giving him a sibling would be that much more special, I feel like.
And you and I, like in pregnancy, were not really excited for the newborn stage because we just felt like we would be more excited once the baby could interact and play and like, even run around, which takes a while. And so we were like, we'll get through the newborn part. People call it the newborn trenches. They're like, it's awful and all this stuff. And I don't know if it was our situation or not, but we love this stage, especially me. I feel like I am thriving. I love him so much. I will just sit, stare, snuggle. We have a very snuggly boy, which definitely makes it nice. And we are lucky to have a happy baby who, gives us smiles and for the most part doesn't cry too much. Well, obviously he does cry, but I feel like overall he's a good baby. He's a happy baby. And I love the newborn stage.
It's so hard to know because we don't know what the other stages are going to be like. A lot of guys that I talk to, it's like at every little milestone, like they're like, it gets better. Your relationship gets deeper. And then, like you'll miss some of that stuff, but at the same time, like they're, growing and maturing and like each stage has its own cool things.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to our story and our experience. And I hope we did not scare you for your future. Just know, again, that everything happens and, expect the worst, but wait, what? Prepare for the worst, but expect the best. And is that it?
I think so. Yeah. Plan for the worst. Yeah.
Be happy, and just know that sometimes life can take a turn. How about that version?
There we go.
We love you guys so much, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.